Hello, this is Dr. Hausinger, and we're going to be looking at CD ethics, protecting the clinical information, and also the client, which is from your Burton book. Here we have some words that are associated with confidential. This is a Wordle depiction. Okay, so your author looks at the different tiers of ethics that we have. Okay, and so we can think of it going from here all the way up. So we have our personal ethics, which might tie into professionalism, right? What you see as your personal ethics that govern yourselves, and then what your agency requires of you, what your licensure credential requires of you. So that would be a little bit of the state and county. So our substance use disorder professional credential or chemical dependency professional credential here in Washington, which is informed by NADAC, our state and county ethics, and then our federal. Okay. So examples of this would be a personal belief about self-disclosure. Do you self-disclose? Well, you're going to run into this. People are going to ask you, are you in recovery? Right. How do you handle that? We're going to talk about that next week. Our agency, what is the employee recovery policy? Do you have to disclose to your agency? Do you have to give your agency a list of your medications? Do they do random UAs on you if you do disclose that you are in recovery as part of their policy? For licensure credential, what is our scope of practice? So as chemical dependency professionals, what can we actually do? Who can we treat? Who can we diagnose? How do we do that? And then what are the limitations? Where does it go? Like, okay, this is out of my area of expertise or out of my licensure certification requirements. So, for example, unless you are a mental health counselor and you are credentialed and licensed for that and have the proper education and exams and all of that, you can't make mental health diagnoses. We are trained to recognize major disorders and make referrals, but you can't diagnose. You can't say, I think you have bipolar, or you have bipolar. You could say, some of the things that you are presenting sound like a mental health concern. I would like to give you a referral. Okay. State and county, that's mandated reporting. Okay. Who are vulnerable people? How do we report? What is the procedure, etc. And then federal would be confidentiality, and that's our CFR 42, and how we handle records. And then the limits, of course, to confidentiality. Okay, ethical decision making. We need to consult all tiers and understand the relationships between them and that there might be conflicts between them. For example, you might feel like it's okay to break confidentiality, but it might be against the law, and you could get yourself in hot water for that. We have the intersection between law and ethics. Privileged communication is a legal term. It restricts information or knowledge by a state statute between a client and specific professionals, for example, doctors and lawyers. Privacy is the client's right to choose in what circumstances his or her personal information is shared, when, what, and with whom. Informed consent is the client's right to privacy and expectations for treatment. So what we tell a client, they should be informed of risks, benefits. We can never guarantee treatment and say this is going to work because there's always an exception. They should know how much something costs up front. They should know if their insurance is going to cover it, etc. They should know alternatives to treatment. They should know your credentials, etc. Okay. How do we handle written client information? Okay. Well, let's look at the tiers of ethics. Okay. So you might have publications, proposals, or supervision things that you write. The examples in textbooks, the examples we give in classes, in order to protect confidentiality and to be ethical about it, it's never just one person. So when I tell you a story about a client that I had, I've changed the details and I've mixed stories together. So that's how we're able to, make movies about people and events. And of course, they're not going to be completely right. There is a Hollywood aspect there. But in terms about writing case studies or writing about clients or the biographies that I give you, those are all amalgamations and configurations. It's not just one person. Okay. That's a way to protect ourselves. At the agency level, we have our progress notes, treatment plans, discharge summaries, clinical record keeping. This semester, I've taught you different ways to write, or actually, we do that in 401. You will learn different ways to write notes. That's the basic way. Whatever agency you go to is going to expand upon that. Mental health notes are a little bit different than chemical dependency notes. So we are in a time and place where we have electronic records, and most places that I'm aware of will also keep a hard copy file of that too, which is not a bad idea because we know that technology can and usually does fail at some point. So you might have an online file, and we have different types of record keeping software that agencies use. Okay. And it's confidential, it's encrypted for the agency, and then we will print things out and then put them in a client file as well. Okay. Licensure, this is our credential renewal, certification, and ethical claims. So if you were to go onto the Department of Health website and look up provider credential search and look up Hausinger, Irene, you'll see what licenses and credentials that I hold. And you would be able to see if there were any judgments against me, if I'm on probation or was ever on probation. I have not been. But you can look up, your coworkers, and you can look up people with credential. And that's not just for chemical dependencies. It's for anything. You can look up veterinarians. You can look up dental hygienists. You can look up radiology technicians. At the state level, we have paperwork for insurance companies and managed care. And at the federal level, we have our HIPAA guidelines, which are rights to privacy and conformed consent. Now, you'll be noticing that a lot of doctors' offices are switching to electronic forms in an effort to save paper, which is good. But you still might be, because how many times do you get the HIPAA paperwork? Every time you go to the doctor. So now you might just have a screen to read and sign off on it. Okay. Now, it's important to note that when a person comes into your agency, they're signing a release not just for you, because they will probably have more than one counselor, but they're signing a release for the secretary and for the billing person and for the admin person so that their insurance can be billed, right? So that more than one person looks at the file. And that's part of the informed consent, that the client needs to know who has access to their information and how it's going to be used. Any chemical dependency professional, substance use disorder professional, is going to tell you 80% of the job is paperwork, 20% of the job is face-to-face time with your clients. This is all the paperwork that we have to do. Accreditation, so making sure that your agency is right with the state, important. Collaboration, this is going to be faxes, reports, maybe your client has a DUI, so you're working with the Department of Licensing, or you have to send, it's called the Blue Form. It's for restricted licenses so that clients can get a license, have their license if they had a DUI, if they need it for their job, so that they just go to work or school and that's it. And they only have that if they're in compliance with treatment. Okay, we have our ASIM assessment, our screening and assessment tools, our program rules and expectations, the HIV brief risk intervention. We report UAs. There's paperwork that the client has to sign every time we do that. Progress notes, treatment plans, discharge summaries, court letters, transfer summaries, intake exit paperwork, and Department of Licensing, drug court, CPS, and opiate treatment provider paperwork. And if you have an adolescent, you have twice the paperwork involved. No joke. Okay, important considerations. If it's not in the file, it didn't happen. You have to write everything down. You have to write everything down that didn't happen. So for example, maybe your client was a no-call, no-show. You have to document it, and then you have to document any attempt that you've made to call them. Okay, very important. If it did not happen, put it in the file. Missed appointments, phone messages. There's a difference between a chart note and a progress note. A progress note is whenever you meet with your client, whether for a one-on-one, and also if you're doing your group notes, you write in a progress note with the group covered and then the individual's participation in that group. A chart note might just be 7/7/2019, case manager Irene Hausinger, counselor Irene Hausinger, called David Hasselhoff's lawyer to schedule appointment, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So anything that you do for the client, referrals, extra paperwork, faxing, phone calls, emails, all of that goes in the file. If you have an email that you have, then you print it out and you put it in the file. The file belongs to the client. They have every right to see it. And I recommend that if you are a patient anywhere, you always get a copy of your file. Always, always get a copy of your medical records. So it's important that we write our progress notes in such a way that it's unbiased and that the client isn't going to get upset, right? It has to be as neutral and clinical as possible. The file is our ethical blueprint. It shows our efforts with the client. Every once in a while, you might hear on the news, and there was a Law and Order SUV with Whoopi Goldberg several years ago about an incident that did happen where social workers were making up notes for clients that they never went to the appointments. And I've personally known people that have been fired for forging notes and appointments that didn't happen. So don't do that. Okay. The file is how we justify what we have done and provides a rationale for treatment. And that's really important with managed care and insurance. They're not going to pay for something that's not working. Okay. Especially if the person has an employee assistance provider, they have to know what's going on, right? So they might not be able to be cleared to go to work. They could lose their job if you aren't up to date with your file. So we have some ethical principles for written record keeping. Veracity, we have to tell the truth. Accuracy, we got to take our bias out of it, and we have to report what happened. Validity and the appropriateness, right? So you don't write down everything that happens in a session, right? So David Hasselhoff came in and he was wearing a blue shirt and he had flip-flops on, and like we don't need necessarily that level of detail, okay? So you have to train your ear when you're in session with somebody to really pull out the important parts here. Okay. Timeliness. Most treatment agencies give you time for your files throughout the day, which is really important. Sometimes, however, emergencies happen, especially in our field, and you might not have time to do your note, which is okay, or you're out sick or something. You have to do it as soon as you're able to, and then you put today's date. So let's say that today is the 7th and I'm out sick and I come into work on the 9th. I put the note 7/9/2019 late entry. Okay. And then you write the date of the services and what happened. Okay. It's got to be clear. So we want to avoid slang. We don't use internet language like LOL or the @ sign. Excuse me. Your handwriting needs to be clear. If it's going to take an advanced PhD in hieroglyphics in order to interpret your handwriting, then you need to type it. And it has to be clear as to what your meaning is. So let's say that you suddenly were no longer working. Hopefully you won the lottery, right? And didn't, pass in a car crash or something. But let's say that you won the lottery and you're like, I'm out. The person who picks up your file should have no problem picking up your file and knowing exactly what's going on with your clients. Everything has to be signed. If you don't initial and sign it, it did not happen. I'm going to say that again. If you don't initial and sign something, it did not happen. So it's incredibly important here that you get things signed. Okay. If you are using, so you have an electronic signature, of course, and if you're a CDPT, then your CDPs are going to sign off on your notes electronically, and also when you print them out to put them in the paper file, you have to sign everything too. So you have to initial every note and then sign the bottom of the paper. There's a lot of signing, right? Credited, right? So you need to put your initials or case manager. We never say I because who is I? A person might have multiple people in the file, okay? Things have to be signed and consented, right? So you have to have all your consent forms signed. You can't just do things without the client's consent. So for example, if the client doesn't have a release of information for their spouse and you call their spouse, that's illegal. Okay. And then it has to be confidential. So if you go to the bathroom and you're in the middle of a file, you can't leave it on your desk, right? turn the monitor of your computer off, put your file in a cabinet, or lock your door go to the bathroom, and then come back. Because you don't know who's wandering around the office. You can't just have files open-faced on your desk or accessible to everybody. Principles of record keeping. All right. So veracity, what's in the file must be true. If there's conflicting information, document it all. So for example, if a person on their assessment says, I don't use cocaine, and their UA comes back for cocaine, you got to document that. Your screening and assessment tools have to be used accurately, so we're usually trained on how to do that. Validity and appropriateness, so you need to fit the paperwork to the client. So we know that the CAGE screening works really well on women and minorities. Timeliness, got to be completed efficiently and in a time-sensitive manner. Clarity, it's got to be written coherently and professionally. Signed, if you and your client didn't sign it, it does not count. Do not forge signatures. Sometimes it happens that a client exits treatment or they go MIA. You have to do everything that you can to get signatures. Credit all authors, that's where we use our own initials. Consented. The release of information, informed consent, clients must be aware of who sees their records. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And then confidential. Prevent the release of client information, even if you're just walking out of your office for a second. Okay. Considerations for storing material. Records need to be secured and out of the way of prying eyes. So not when you first come into the office, people's files shouldn't be there. Are the records locked at all times? They should be. Are the records stored in a locked file cabinet, in a locked office, in a locked building? So we have 3 levels of defense there. And again, it shouldn't be in the front office. It needs to be somewhere that it would be difficult to get to. Do you lock your office when you leave for a moment? You need to. What is on your computer? If you have a client come in upset and they don't have an appointment, you have to be very careful about that. Right? Electronic material usually needs to be encrypted. If you're working from home, you might need an agency-only computer that your family members and kids don't have access to. Things need to be encrypted. Okay? And there are particular potential ethical issues for mobile clinicians here, in that what happens if you have files in your car and your car is broken into, right? What do you do? So you might have, there's different things that you can do. So, and your agency is going to train you on these. It's very, very, very important that you take precautions. We just don't leave files in cars, right? If you're using an agency-specific computer, it's got to be password protected and encrypted with passwords. Ethics for electronics. Okay. So, if you are, well, first off, you probably have heard phone messages. If you call a counselor or a doctor, if this is an emergency, call 911. Okay, that's basic covering of the basis. Okay, important. Usually we put on our phones like what our hours are. Can they expect you to return their call within a business day or 2 business days? If you're going on vacation or something, it's important that your clients know who is covering for you and who they call in case of emergency. If we do not have that, we could be accused of something called client abandonment, which could be a legal issue. So for example, let's say that you're a master's level mental health therapist and you go on vacation and you're working with high-risk clients and they don't know who to call or who's covering for you or when you're coming back and somebody commits suicide, you could be held legally responsible for that. They could argue that in court. Okay. Hello, you've reached Dr. Hausinger. My work hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. I will return your call within 1 business day. All phone calls left after 3 p.m. on Friday will be returned on Monday. If you need immediate assistance, please call the on-call clinician, blah, 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 blah. If it's an emergency, please call 911. Okay, so it's just simple like that. Right? Or, hello, this is Dr. Hausinger. I will be on vacation from August 1st to August 31st. In my absence, Dr. House is going to be taking on my patient load, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's something that's really easy to address. Email disclosures. You probably see this with your professors. Something really simple like this. Confidentiality notice: the contents of this email message and any attachments are intended solely for the addressees and may contain confidential and or privileged information and may be legally protected from disclosure. If you are not the intended recipient of this message or their agent, or if this message has been addressed to you in error, please immediately alert the sender by reply email and then delete this message and any attachments. If you are not the intended recipient, or you are hereby notified that any use, dissemination, copying, or storage of this message or its attachments is strictly prohibited. Again, really easy. So you can encrypt documents. All Word has that. It's pretty easy to do. Lock down your social media. So you need to decide what your professional presence is going to be. A lot of us have fake names on Facebook and social media. Okay. If you're a drug and alcohol counselor, it's probably not a good idea to have pictures of you, imbibing substances, even if you're a normie. So you need to look at that professional side of that. How am I going to be portrayed? Okay. Don't add clients to social media accounts. I would also be very, very careful about adding people that you work with to social media. I don't. That's my personal policy. I do not. And the reason for this is I had a coworker that I added who didn't have the boundaries that I did, and she added clients, active clients. And there was one person that I knew that had a really violent past, and I was a little concerned that this person was overly attached to me. And I found that they were messaging me on Facebook and my other folders. And so after that, I'm not doing this. I also had a nightmare that this person murdered me, and I know that this person had really violent tendencies. So that was the end of that. So it's not just about not adding clients, but you have to be careful about your coworkers as well. Okay. And then protect your online presence. Nowadays, sometimes people won't hire you unless you have an online presence, because the opposite is like, who is this person? Are they a legitimate person? Are they a scam artist? So it may be important to have an online presence, and for jobs, you might have to. You might be listed on the website, or if you're doing politics or advocating or something like that, you might have a nice professional presence online, but you have to be careful. I recommend that you Google yourself. That sounds so dirty. That you Google yourself regularly, or have somebody else, and make sure that things are locked down and that are the way that you would want them to be online. Okay. And having fake names on social media isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay. So I would like us to discuss this week as well. Okay, it's on page 79 of your book. Read the Billy scenario and ask yourself, is the book unethical? If so, why not? If not, why? What are some of the ethical concerns that you could potentially see? In addition to the veracity or truth issues that arise, what are the ethical implications of a counselor relapse? And how could this book have been handled so as to follow ethical principles, and what adjustments could have been made? Okay. So, not just written material, but spoken clinical material. We must uphold the principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-officiance, and justice. I'm so proud of myself. I said those all correctly. Okay, so this is some of the first things that you see in your text. It is unethical to mislead or outright lie to clients. In teaching and training, we have to carefully select what you use for groups and teaching, making sure that it doesn't reflect a bias that you have. Communication, always check to see if you have a release prior to speaking to the person. So if somebody calls and says, hi, I want to know if Olivia Newton-John is a client, and you haven't checked the release, you can say, I can neither confirm nor deny that this person has services here. Okay. And it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know, I'll research that. I say that to my students, I say that to my clients, and you actually gain respect this way. Just don't make stuff up. That's not good. Okay. So we might have some confused roles that we see, and it's important to find what you're really going to look here for is the balance. Okay, so guiding somebody versus gushing, teaching versus preaching, providing options versus saying you have to do this, and then stretching, helping somebody grow versus supporting and or enabling. your book goes into further details about that. So we got to find the middle ground there. Okay. Thank you for your attention.